Okay, hi, welcome back. Foundations of Bioenergetics or Foundations of Body-Based Therapy with me, Devraj. This week we're looking at the pelvis, very exciting part of the body. Something fascinating about the pelvis is that this, more than any other part of our body, is an area that is repressed in its movement by pretty much all human cultures outside of parts of Africa, where pelvic movement is kind of seen as natural and allowed, and maybe little bits of Brazil too. But everywhere else in the world, pelvic movement is heavily repressed, and we learn to suppress pelvic movements as we grow up in whichever culture we're surrounded by. The reason for this is almost certainly because the sexual organs are located in the pelvis, and so controlling this area, not allowing ourselves to be too sexual, has long been a kind of something, very deep inside not only religious culture, but human culture in general. And so people grow up, in a culture where they learn, not that your dad teaches you or tells you or something, but you just learn from how you see people around you not to move your pelvis too much. And then this becomes structured in your body so that after a certain point, after a number of years, you literally can't move your pelvis very much unless you start to really work with that area of the body. The muscles, the psoas muscles, the other muscles, the hip flexors have become armored. And the impact of this repression goes deeper than just sexuality or feeling confident to be sexual. Because the pelvis and pelvic movements especially have the capacity to release tension from other areas of the body, from the whole body in fact. Back in the day, Wilhelm Reich wrote a very famous book, English title would be The Function of the Orgasm. And in there, he proposed the idea that when a human being has an orgasm properly, they can really let go into the physical experience of it, the movements start in the pelvis, and then they flow in such a way as to release tension from the whole body, from the whole organism. But actually, you don't need to be having orgasms in order to make use of natural and spontaneous pelvic movement. We can get there with bioenergetics also. So in this week's episode, we're going to be looking at two specific forms of pelvic release. One is a bit more common perhaps and often called psoas release, referring to the iliopsoas muscles, which I'm not showing you here because I haven't got on the mat yet. But anyway, it would be easier just to look them up on Google or something like that. And the second, which is known as pelvic release, which really works around getting the pelvis to just move naturally. And you can't really actually invoke that, but you can set the stage and hope. Now, in a minute, I'm going to go through these exercises quite quickly, not as a follow-along thing, but just as usual, just to show you how it goes, and you can make a follow-along exercise from it afterwards. But something to be aware of here is actually the more time that you spend on the build-up, on getting prepared for pelvic exercises, on slowly feeling into it, the introductory phases, the more time that you spend on that, the more release you are likely to get. Generally with the pelvis, you can't just jump in and kind of, okay, pelvis, time to release, let's do it. Doesn't really work like that. When I'm running classes, workshops and stuff, and I'm doing a pelvic thing, often there's like an hour of preparation before you actually get to the pelvic release phase. That's a little bit different with the first of the exercises we're going to see, the psoas release, but with the pelvic release, which is a deeper release for most people, it absolutely, the more time that you can spend on preparation, the better. Okay, that stuff said, let's get down on the mat and let's show you how it goes. Okay, so the first exercise, like I said, is going to be called psoas release. And I recommend that you do it along to a 2-minute ding track. You start in the diamond leg position with the soles of your feet pressed together, rather as though they're in a kind of prayer pose. Your heels quite close to your ass and your knees hanging to the side. So your heels, your tailbone, the rest of your back are on, and the back of your head are on the mat. By the way, don't use a pillow for these kinds of exercises because it tends to, it compresses your throat if you raise your head. So it's good to have the back of your head on the mat. So for the first 2 minutes, you just lie there, eyes closed, and feel your body. When the ding goes again, keeping your feet on the mat, you simply raise your tailbone about 1 or 2 inches. That's like 3 to 5 centimeters. Not a big sort of yogic power lift, but just a very subtle lift, about 1 or 2 inches off the mat. And at the same time, you can squeeze your shoulders together.
So that takes, your shoulder blades are touching the mat, back of my head still touching the mat, but my back is otherwise off the mat. And you stay in this position, breathing and feeling your body for 3 dings. Now it's important that you don't kind of push right up and hold it like that. That's not the exercise. Remember, tailbone is just like 1 to 2 inches, 3 to 5 centimeters off the mat. So you breathe and feel. Eyes are closed and you feel especially the pelvic area. When the ding goes, you gently relax your pelvis back down. Relax your shoulders as well, so your back comes back onto the mat. And you spend 1 more ding just breathing, feeling your body, relaxing. When the ding goes again, we're going to do a second exercise, and this one's a little tricky to explain, but basically keeping the soles of your feet together, you lift your knees as far as they will go. It's like a kind of feeling exercise rather than a big push. You lift your knees as far as they will go, keeping the soles of your feet together. So if the lower part of my soles come apart, then I've come out of the exercise. I've got to keep the soles of my feet together, but I'm applying some upward pressure on my knees. And again, just keep breathing and feeling the body. And this continues for 2 more dings. And then when the ding goes again, instead of relaxing this time, you change your leg position such that the soles of your feet are now flat on the mat and your knees and your ankles are touching. And then for about 5 dings, you're going to gently separate to your knees, looking for any position where some kind of slight trembling might come in. It has to be a kind of spontaneous thing. And when you find it, you just stay there for 5 minutes, just trying to allow it, trying not to get in the way of it, trying not to drive it anywhere, not to do anything kind of therapeutic with it, but just to allow it to happen if it happens. Now, if you're separating your knees and you don't really feel much, by the way, the soles of your feet should again stay flat on the mat. You don't kind of go so far that the insides of your feet come off the mat. You just keep feeling and looking, sensing your body and seeing if there's any point where some kind of spontaneous movement starts to come in. And you maintain that for about 5 dings. You can do longer if there's a lot going on. And then at the end, to complete, you need to spend 3 dings, flat out, breathing, feeling your body. Okay, so that's the psoas release. Now let's look at the pelvic release, which is a stronger sequence for most people. And like I said, it does take more setup. What I really recommend you do is to do 2 sequences of the Reichian 9-stage armor release, also done in this position before you begin, on something like a 1.5 ding. If you do that level of preparation, you greatly increase the chances of getting a decent release later on in the exercise. Okay, so say you've done that, and the whole thing, by the way, is done in this Reichian working position. Soles of the feet flat on the mat, heels about hip width apart and a comfy distance from your ass. Again, back of the head down, back down. And then the first exercise you're going to do, and we do it along to a 5-minute ding, should have said that. And the first 5 minutes is pelvic tilting, which basically means on the in-breath, you tilt your pelvis down. So my tailbone stays down on the mat, my lower back comes up, and my anus moves towards the mat on the inhale. On the exhale, I reverse that as far as it will go whilst keeping the tailbone on the mat. So it's like... Eyes are closed and I'm really feeling my body, especially the pelvic area. Remember, there's no lifting here. Your tailbone stays on the mat the whole time. And you just see how far you can tilt it backwards and forwards, following the breath. Inhale, lower back comes up. Exhale, lower back comes back down. Now you can do this, if you don't have tons of time, you can do this for just 5 minutes and then move on to the next exercise. If you have more time to invest, then do it for 10 minutes, 2 dings. And then when the ding goes, you're going to change the movement. You're still going to be following the breathing, but we're going to do pelvic lift and lower. So on the inhale now, I'm going to lift my pelvis 1 or 2 inches off the mat. No more than 2 inches, no more than 5 centimeters. That's important. It's really not a yogic kind of power lift thing, It's really a subtle movement of the pelvis, which is all about feeling. So it's like... And then gently lower it down again on the exhale. And you continue like that, either for 1 or 2 5-minute dings, depending on how much time you can give it. And then we come to the third stage, which is the release stage. And what we're going to do here is very similar to the last one. We lift the pelvis up gently on the inhale, about 2 inches off the mat. And then on the exhale, instead of controlling it on the way down, I'm just going to let go. So it's like... So I'm getting a little bump on my tailbone. Now it shouldn't hurt the tailbone. So if it does hurt the tailbone, you need to use a little bit more insulation, maybe a second yoga mat, or you need to make sure that you're not pulling your pelvis too far off the mat. You know, you're not physically driving this exercise. This is important, and it's hard for many people to get. You know, they're used to physically doing stuff to get a result, which is obviously appropriate in many fields. But working with the pelvis like this, it's a bit different. So it is like this kind of... You do that for 5 minutes, 1 ding. And then with the second ding, you start to speed it up and you really explore the movement. So it's like... And in fact, you can let go of following the breathing and just let the pelvis bounce itself out if it wants to. So it might go like... You literally try to just sit back and see what happens. You know, this is another example of catharsis. There's a mechanical movement that you follow for a period of time, and then you create space to see if a natural movement wants to come in, but you can't force it. If you're particularly from a kind of rigid character structure or mindset, this is super challenging because you're used to driving everything forwards. But just do your best to just let go and see if something spontaneous happens. What will usually happen if something spontaneous does happen in this exercise is that your mind will go, whoa, what's going on here? It'll be like there'll be an actual sense of strangeness, you know, that it's weird, that, my God, my pelvis is just doing it itself, you know, it's just taking over. But just reassure yourself that's okay, and then try to let your mind have a little rest, sitting in the background, and just give space to your pelvis to do its thing. Because this is what we're talking about at the beginning of this episode, you know, the pelvis on its own, when it's set free from all this constraint that's been placed on it by our cultures, it can start to release tension and do all sorts of exciting things naturally on its own, with no input from the mind. So basically you lie here, after this 5 minutes you start to speed up the dings, and you can continue for like 2 more dings, another 10 minutes, or if you wish, longer. And then at some point you must give yourself 10 minutes of just lying down, feeling your body integrating.
Okay, so those are our 2 very exciting pelvic exercises. What I haven't mentioned is the role of music. With the first exercise, the Psoas release, you can just play some gentle kind of yoga music in the background if you wish, because sometimes the music can help to relax us and calm us and to feel the body more. Certainly for me, that's the case. With the second exercise, you really need to make a little playlist. Some gentle music to start with, and then when you get into a real bumping, you know, after the first 5 minutes of drop, you know, and you start to do free-form bumping or allow free-form bumping, you can play some good, strong kind of uplifting dance music with a nice kind of 128 BPM, you know, thudding in the background. That will really that will really kind of give space to your pelvis just to let go. And then at the end, of course, more relaxing music just to ground yourself back down and feel. Okay, so those are 2 very exciting pelvic exercises that we can do to create some release. Do remember, especially if you're new to this stuff, this can be very intense and it may stir up a lot of stuff, you know, for you later in the day. You may find yourself suddenly very weepy or very, very angry and reactive. So go easy with it when you first start. And remember, if you're struggling later in the day, okay, I need to feel my body. Feel your body. The deepest level of processing happens when we pay attention to the sense of the body. Great stuff. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for following me. Don't forget to check out my website, bioenergetics.org.uk, for courses, books, all that kind of stuff, one-to-one sessions. And I'll be back with you shortly for more Foundations of Body-Based Therapy. Thank you.